Thank you for tuning in to Growing Tech Fast, the condensed podcast in which conversations about growing SaaS startups are had with those who have grown them. Now, today I am joined by Laurie Mascott, who has had a wonderful career helping various SaaS startups scale their commercial teams, particularly in sales across EMEA, some exposure in APAC as well. Also works at some big companies like Oracle. But Laurie at the moment is currently VP at Concentra Analytics. So Laurie, it's an absolute pleasure to have you today. Thank you for joining us.
No, thanks for having me, Connor. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely, me too. Well, to kick us off, Laurie, it'll be great to hear a bit from yourself. If you want to give your own intro, I've given a little teaser there, but if you want to tell us a bit about who Laurie is, a bit about your background, I think that'd be a good starting point.
Yeah, perfect. Love to. So, as you can see from the sort of grey hairs, I have been doing this a while. So I think I've just gone past 30 years in the industry. And actually my very, very first job after graduating was in a UK British startup called Systems Union, which we grew to over 100 million, about $110 million in turnover. So a great grounding in a British company, which was even more delightful. I've also worked for some US companies, really starting their operations in EMEA or EMEA and APAC, had a number of sort of successful exits as well as a few that weren't so successful, which I probably learned more from than actually I did the successful ones. So yeah, I've been doing this quite a while. Currently working in the startup environment. We've now sort of scaled that organisation quite a lot. I'd sort of describe myself a little bit as not necessarily like all the other boys in terms of traditional sales leaders. So I think, you know, having had a 30-year career, you have to keep reinventing yourself. And that's actually really hard to do. And my sort of view was over the last sort of 5 to 10 years, certainly the world that I'm in, the enterprise software market, has really, really changed massively. So, you know, when I first started, when most sales leaders or those people in leadership positions first started, certainly in the world of sales, it was, large on-premise single licenses and that sort of thing. And the world of go-to-market was very different. The world of sales, I think, was very different. The world of buying was different. And I really think that over the last sort of, I'll say the last 10 years, but actually more so the last 5 to 10 years, the world has moved on massively. So I think buyers have just got much, much more savvy, much more clued up. We've seen the sort of the world of social selling open up as well, and social marketing, and SaaS obviously being one of the main changes. So I sort of felt a little bit like a dinosaur. So for years I've been telling sales organizations, leading sales organizations, explaining to them how I want them to sell. But actually, I didn't feel qualified to do that anymore because I hadn't done it in what I regard as a new world. So in fact, I made an unusual decision for sort of someone with my background to actually go back into sales, get my sleeves rolled up and do it, just to make sure that the techniques I wanted to use, the methodology I wanted to use actually was still valid and still worked. And to be honest, I've had to adapt and change. But from a personal perspective, it was a really good boost because I was phenomenally successful again at direct selling. So that made me think that, in fact, actually, I do know what I'm doing in this new world. It is a new world. You need to change and you need to adapt. And now I've been able to apply that with my sort of previous experience. So actually, I think I'm sort of a better sales leader than ever, having gone through that experience.
Okay, thank you very much for that overview. That's fantastic insight. Obviously, I think Laurie it seems as if you feel quite strongly, obviously, sales has been, and tech specifically, has been revolutionized right over the last 30 years, particularly that introduction,
Totally.
as you said, of
Yeah.
SaaS. So I'm interested to dig into a few things there. So you said, like, I think something you mentioned would be quite interesting is how the rise of SaaS, right, has changed, particularly, say, the go-to-market strategy and how that needs to be done in this new age of sales, right? So how do you think that, like, or I guess why do you feel that SaaS had that effect, and what kind of effect has it had in terms of go-to-market strategy? So I guess what I'm getting at is what's different now compared to, say, when you were at a systems union, for example.
I think in the old world, certainly procurement, buying, the way people bought solutions was very different. By definition, it had to be, there was always a lot more involvement in IT. It always involved a lot more capital spend, which by definition itself sort of required more scrutiny. That's changed. So now, certainly in the sort of applications that I've been involved with, it is very much around selling to the business. It's, I think, the business case, proving value, providing value has really come to the fore. And that's changed the way that we need to sell when we're engaged in an opportunity, but also the way we need to market to start developing those opportunities as well.
Okay, very interesting. And you said specifically, obviously, then you took that decision to, I guess, segue from leadership, get your sleeves rolled up, do the sales because you felt it was going to teach you quite a lot, and then obviously now heading up things
back
at
into
Concentra.
leadership.
So, yeah, so you said that second time around, you said you're very, very successful, but it was very, very different, right, from the first time around you were selling when you were very successful. So what did it teach you, I guess, that second time around, we'll call it, when you were coming back into things, into sales? What are the biggest things you learned?
I think there are sort of various, I suppose, elements in this thing that we call the sales cycle. And the thing that I think changed most dramatically was engaging with potential clients and moving that actually into either a sales or, more importantly, a buying cycle. So it was that sort of engagement piece, which I think the salesman now has to take more responsibility for, in terms of understanding the target marketplace much, much better than I ever actually felt I had to. Understanding the individual organizations more, and going really upfront with a tailored value proposition to that organization. Whereas before, it was, and I go back, well, actually not that long ago, probably still in some companies, maybe how they still do business today. But it was someone would talk to you, that's fantastic, I'm going to give you a demo. There was a lovely, I was listening to another podcast actually, which was from a couple of people that I know very well. Steve Fearon at Capita, who was ex-Oracle, and Tim Hughes. And they were talking, and Steve is now a CEO. And he was saying that, every week he probably gets hit on LinkedIn and various other formats 700 times. Now, he's not going to listen to any of those. However, what he was explaining, that as a CEO, he would give time where he really felt that someone had come up with a value proposition that was unique and he really couldn't ignore. So I think that was actually a great tip from a different podcast, but something that really resonated me in terms of modus operandi. So I think in terms of modus operandi, pre-sale, if you like, it's about really understanding your audience much more than we ever had to, and crafting a value proposition, and then taking that and tailoring it more to maybe individual needs once you're into that sales cycle. And that has implications across the entire marketing organization as well. So particularly in the startup world, where I think, you really can't separate the sort of sales and marketing function. But it really is making it much more aligned. And then obviously, as organizations, as your startup starts to grow, then sort of tweaking that approach. But that whole sort of foundation of building pipeline through to early engagement is something that has changed massively over the last few years.
Interesting. Yeah, I think what I'm really picking up there, Laurie, is you're talking about the need for a tailored, specific value proposition, right, versus the kind of maybe spray and pray, which maybe worked in the past more so than it does now. Now, I find that interesting. Here's where I want to bring in, actually, because you referenced this a couple of times. You mentioned before the role of social selling, right, and how that has obviously become more evolved. And then I guess you also mentioned just there from the podcast you listened to of your friend who's the CEO, who was mentioning he gets hit up around 700 times on LinkedIn, right? So social in some ways has probably actually enhanced the spray and pray model as well. So
totally,
I'm really interested to hear from you. And it is a debate. Obviously, people phase. You get some people are very old school who think social maybe doesn't have much of a place. Some on the other spectrum who are all about social. So from your perspective and from your experience, how do you feel social fits in, and what kind of part should it play in the running of a B2B SaaS organization?
It certainly is a major part, but it's not the be all and end all. So I sort of used the word platform, and at the end of the day, particularly when it comes to startup environments, pipeline is king. I mean, it really is. There are probably two kings. It's pipeline and it's cash. So building pipeline is massively important, because at the end of the day, sales is pretty much a function of pipeline. In that pipeline building, I think social selling, social marketing, however you want to term it, is important, but it's not the be all and end all. It needs to be part of the overall platform for going to market. And there are other techniques as well. Interestingly, sort of taking on board one of the things that you said, one thing that I've seen work really well for me and members of my team over the last few years has actually been the good old-fashioned veto letter. Do you remember those? Very important top officer. So, a very simple one-page, highly tailored document that goes to individuals in an organization, very much tailored to them as an individual and as an organization, and sort of demonstrating, effectively sort of earning the right, actually, to talk to them. And there's a model that I learned 30 years ago, which I think is still applicable, which is actually the you, we, I three-stage approach. So actually, the most important thing is them. And let's demonstrate that we actually care about that, and we've put in some time and some effort to understand what we believe their challenges might be. Then potentially how we can do something about it together. And then you're kind of, I'm earning the right as me to have that conversation and to take it further. So social media absolutely is one of those mechanisms for getting those messages across. Good old-fashioned veto letters. Occasionally the smile and dial. We often hear about the 7 touches, and actually I think those touches across various mediums are important, and even maybe taking potentially an account-based marketing approach as well. So it really is a combination, but it's building out that platform. And the good thing in startup world is actually the sort of cost of entry to doing that is relatively low for a startup. So it can. I've been sort of first person on the ground where I've kind of had to do all of that myself and been able to do it. And then as we've grown, I've maybe had someone specific on the sort of social side, someone specific maybe on the more hands-on sort of business SDR type follow-up. But then we can start to scale that. But it's about building out that platform, I think, particularly in the startup world.
Fantastic, thanks for that. And I think there you just keep coming back to something that's really sticking with me here is the need for a tailored approach, right? Whatever medium. And I think we can all testify to, I certainly get them all the time, people who hit me up on LinkedIn. And I think, clearly nothing, you've taken no time to think anything about me, about the business. And yeah, I think that's like a real way to close the door before it's open, right? And I love that takeaway of the you first, and I guess customer centric selling, right? Putting the customer at the heart of things. So I really like that. Now, what I want to pivot to here, Laurie, you just mentioned there, you've been first person on the ground, right? So you're really someone who knows and has experienced growth of these fast growing technology startups. You've been at different stages, right? So I just want to talk to you about something that we've discussed before, which is around what you term these glass ceilings of growth. Okay, so I'd love for you to unpack for me and also for the listeners just a bit more around what it is firstly you mean by that phrase.
So I think in the life cycle of an organization, there are some particular stages, and the one that I've experienced is in enterprise software. And to get to the next level of organization, you're effectively having to break some barriers, some what I term the glass ceilings, and smash through those. And actually, forget the numbers, then it's not an exact science, but kind of the glass ceilings that I've seen have been getting that first client on board, that first customer. That's really, really hard. And you need to be really careful as to how where you spend your time. There are organizations that I've worked with which simply, it's just not in their DNA to be your first client. But then, there are other organizations who I've worked with who have been more willing to do so. It's just in their sort of DNA to maybe be a little bit more early adopter. So it's trying to find those, work with those, and it's also a very different type of sell. So it's not I've got the best brand, I've got the biggest product, I've got the best product. It's actually, do you know what? We're a startup. We're dynamic. We're agile. We're going to work with you. We're going to work closely with you. And actually, what I'm selling you isn't about what I'm selling you today. It's about the journey that we're going to go on together. So I do think in those early stages, the sales process is incredibly different. It is what I call the journey sell, but it's getting those first few customers. And, I've seen lots of organizations win a few customers and then not go anywhere, because actually I think the sort of next glass ceiling, so having got those first few customers, you then need to sort of reinvent and adapt again. And it's kind of breaking, and we'll do it in terms of sort of ARR, I think, because that's a useful measure these days. But so it's sort of first clients, breaking through the next glass ceiling, where you need to fundamentally change the organization and the way that you go about things. And it feels that that's like at around $1 million ARR. And then it kind of feels like the next one where you have to start changing the organization is about 10 million. Then I think it's around 20. Then I think it's kind of 50. And then it's probably 100, by which time, to be honest, I'm probably the wrong person to be working with you anyway. So I've not really gone past that much. But it involves really looking at your organization, changing it. It involves looking at whether we're going to hire behind the curve, ahead of the curve. But an awful lot that needs to be taken into consideration. And fundamentally, I think at those sort of pivot points, those glass ceilings, you need to be looking at how you're going to change it's a bit like Alex Ferguson, and every 2 or 3 years he reinvented that Man U team. And the organizations that I've been seen to be successful have reinvented themselves, and the organizations that haven't gone through those glass ceilings are actually the ones that really haven't taken the chance to reinvent themselves.
Interesting. Yes, it's like continuing to change, right, is the key to development and to
Yeah,
growth.
absolutely.
Okay.
And then you've got a sort of mix of there's that fine balance between process and entrepreneurial spirit. And I've seen, I'm actually a believer in sales process, but sort of the three bears approach. So not too much, not too little, just the right amount. And I've seen organizations that have had that entrepreneurial spirit kicked out of their sales teams, their marketing teams, because actually they've tried to put too much process in too early. And it's that there has to be that right balance, particularly as you're scaling the organization, of maintaining that entrepreneurial spirit, but the right amount of process as well.
Okay, cool. Out of interest, Laurie, because I know you've worked at some large companies, right? You've been at Oracle, for example, right?
Yep.
How's the process entrepreneurial spirit kind of I guess dichotomy held together at the likes of an Oracle compared to the likes of a startup that you've worked at, a Systems Union or a Concentra, for example? Is there a difference, do you think, or is that too much of a generalization?
No, an organization like Oracle is incredibly process centric. Still phenomenally successful. I loved working there. I learned a lot. I stayed a lot longer than I meant to, which is testimony to the organization. And actually, from a sales perspective, potentially maybe a bit burdensome on the process, but you kind of understand why, just because of the scale that they're working at. But also the ability of that organization to sort of turn the oil tanker was amazing.
Okay.
And it really was. So,
yeah,
it was willing to say, okay, this isn't working for us. We're going to change it and we're going to go big time. Which was a great learning curve for me. Another good example of a large organization that actually maintained at the time, I think, that healthy balance between entrepreneurialism and process was actually Siebel. And Siebel invented sort of sales process and those sorts of things. But it wasn't overburdensome. Where I've worked for smaller organizations, and to be honest, there's more process in place than I've actually had at the likes of Oracle and Siebel. And you know what? Those organizations aren't going to crash through those glass ceilings because you need to really maintain that sort of togetherness, that sort of entrepreneurial spirit as well. And too much process can kill it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. It's that healthy balance between the two, right? And how that is put together. Okay.
And that balance will change as you go through those glass ceilings as well, I think, to an element.
So, okay, cool. So kind of adjust depending on where you're at, right, in terms of that cycle. Okay. Just going back then to these glass ceilings, right? This might be a difficult question for you, or maybe quite simple, but what is the toughest glass ceiling to break through and why?
You know what? I think they all have their challenges. Honestly, where I suppose from experience, I've seen more companies falter or stall is actually probably on that 1 million. Getting through, taking it from, I've managed to work with a couple of clients now to actually getting some sustainable revenues at 1 million. That's probably been the toughest, actually.
Okay. And what's the biggest piece of advice you would give to a company at that stage? If you were coming in right at that stage again, how would you get them from a couple of clients right through that £1 million barrier?
Build out the sort of unified, and again, it doesn't have to be starting large, the unified sales and marketing platform. Be very, very focused in terms of who you're going for, your initial targets, and your message.
Okay, cool. I like it. So that part of it, yeah, okay. So that's probably for you the toughest barrier, but all come with their challenges, right? And
Of
for me,
course.
and I think something that listeners will be interested in, we've got a lot of sales leaders, business leaders who listen out. Laurie, obviously you've been there and done it as first person on the ground, okay? So what I'm keen to hear about from you is, you kind of referenced before, obviously it's key to try and find those early adopters to
Yep.
try and open up to then reach through that glass ceiling of initial customers all the way up to kind of 1 million mark. So what I want to get at here is, like, is there a good approach for, like, I guess, seeking out these early adopters? I'm thinking this is going to be really useful for anyone in the position of first person on the ground, any companies looking to open up new territories as well. Yeah, what would your biggest advice be to try and locate those early adopters?
It's sort of a tough one, that one, because some of it does come down to experience and just sort of, listening to people. So there are some very large, well-established organizations out there that people always want to have as their clients. In the UK, people want to have NatWest and Tesco and Unilever, et cetera, et cetera. There's that sort of elite group that people love their logos on their website. A lot of those are going to be really tough to work with, and have really, really sophisticated buying processes. So it's about whether you can identify someone who's either a person or an organization who's maybe demonstrated that they are willing to be an early adopter, and see the value to be derived from going through that sort of journey sell. Because, like I said, often in startup world, we're not selling a fixed point. It's not, here is the fully baked application, you're good to go, it's used by 10,000 other people. It's, no, we have a starting point. We're going to enhance it. We're going to improve. We're going to love you as a customer. You're going to love us as a supplier. And we're really going to work, people, the word partnership in sales is bandied about so much, but actually work in partnership. And that's potentially quite an interesting value proposition in itself. So finding the people and organizations that are willing to go down that journey sell.
Okay, interesting. Fantastic. Well, I think we've covered so much there. We've talked about these glass ceilings, the challenges. We spoke about how to potentially open up new territories. SaaS has revolutionized go-to-market strategy. So we've covered a whole lot in a short space of time. Just to finish us off, I'd love if you could just synthesize, if there was one takeaway that you would love our listeners to have from everything we've discussed today around the startup world, right, around growth. What would it be? Just one takeaway that you can leave our listeners with.
One takeaway. Wow. I'm going to go very much from the sales perspective on this. So don't get overly flattered by people who want to join your organization. What I mean by that is, so when I worked at places like Oracle, when I've seen people from like SAP, you know what, those sales guys really, really know how to facilitate the buying process. The world of startup is really, really different. And I mean, I love it, but you really have to hone what I term your sales skills. So get people on board that are willing to go through that journey and fight some of those battles, because startup is hard. And I've got it wrong. I have taken people on from, I was flattered by the brand of organizations that they came from. And on paper, they looked fantastic. but put them into a startup world and they completely floundered. Like I said, they were brilliant at, these large organizations facilitating the buying process, but actually going out there and making things happen and selling just floundered. So get the right people on board who have maybe done this before, preferably recently. And like I said, I had to completely reinvent myself. And it's that combination of experience, I think, which has enhanced my personal value. But it's finding the people that have a passion for it, have an ability for it, and the desire to keep on going with it. Because startups are hard.
Fantastic. I love it. I think echoes what someone once said to me as I was starting to grow out my team, which is, it's very simple. You find great people and you keep great people. Harder than it sounds, but yeah, that's it. Well, anyway, Laurie, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Really, really do appreciate it.
Brilliant. Connor, thanks very much indeed.
No worries. Thanks all. Cheers.
Take care. Bye now.